Late summer 1972, Hong Kong. Inside a private rehearsal space reserved for film work, the air is still, the lights are already on, no cameras are running. Mats lie flat, edges aligned. The room measures less than 40 feet across. There are no spectators seated, only 7 men standing, spread unevenly, each within clear view of the center. Bruce Lee is present for preparation, not demonstration. He is dressed for movement, not performance. A watch is removed and set aside. Shoes remain on. No one speaks at first. At exactly 3:17 p.m., a comment is made, not loud, not hostile. It is framed as technical doubt, a question about practicality, about whether what is being rehearsed would function outside controlled conditions. The words travel farther than intended in the enclosed space. Positions shift. 2 men move closer to the wall. One steps toward the exit and stops. The distance between bodies narrows to less than 6 feet. No one raises a voice. No one laughs. Time becomes measurable. 8 seconds will matter. Nothing has happened yet. The rehearsal room was not part of the main studio floor. It sat one level above, separated by a narrow stairwell and a door that remained closed once work began. The space had been reserved specifically for movement practice related to Game of Death. No filming was scheduled that afternoon. No crew beyond those required for preparation had been asked to attend. The room measured approximately 38 feet long and just under 20 feet wide. The ceiling was low enough that overhead lights hung close, casting even illumination without shadow. The floor was covered with flat training mats, fitted edge to edge, leaving no visible gaps. Against one wall stood a bench holding a towel, a notebook, and a mechanical stopwatch. Another wall remained bare. The final wall contained the only exit, a solid door that opened inward. 7 men were present. No one sat. 2 stood near the far corner, shoulders against the wall. 1 remained close to the door, leaving less than 2 feet of space behind him. The others were spread along the length of the room, forming a loose semicircle without clear intent. No one blocked another's view. Everyone could see the center. Bruce Lee entered without ceremony. There was no introduction. He had already been working elsewhere in the building earlier that day and arrived carrying nothing. He wore plain training clothes, light shoes, no jewelry. Before stepping onto the mats, he removed his watch and placed it on the bench beside the stopwatch. The action took less than 5 seconds. At 3:12 p.m., movement practice resumed. The work focused on distance management and timing rather than choreography. Each motion was performed once, then reset. There was no repetition for the show. When a sequence ended, it ended cleanly. No one applauded. No one commented. The room remained quiet enough that breathing was audible. The hum of the lights was constant. Outside noise from the studio below did not carry upward. At 3:15 p.m., one of the men near the wall adjusted his stance, shifting his right foot back by several inches. Another crossed his arms and leaned his weight onto his left leg. These movements were subtle, unremarkable on their own, but they marked a change from stillness to attention. Bruce Lee did not address the group. He faced the open space, marking positions with his eyes, measuring distance rather than people. At one point, he stepped forward exactly 4 feet, then stopped. He stepped back the same distance and remained still. The rehearsal was not instructional. No explanations were offered. The focus remained on structure, where the body was placed, how much room existed between 2 points, how long a pause lasted before movement resumed. At 3:17 p.m., the silence changed. A single sentence was spoken from less than 8 feet away. It was delivered evenly, without raised volume or aggressive tone. The words were technical, framed as assessment rather than confrontation. They questioned whether the method being rehearsed would function beyond controlled conditions. The sentence ended. No follow-up came immediately. The effect was not emotional, but spatial. 2 men along the wall repositioned, increasing the distance between themselves and the center by roughly 1 foot. The man near the door shifted sideways, bringing his shoulder closer to the frame. The semicircle tightened without coordination. No one laughed. No one corrected the remark. No authority intervened. Bruce Lee remained where he was. His posture did not change. He did not speak. His hands stayed relaxed at his sides. The distance between him and the nearest person narrowed to just under 6 feet. Time was now measurable in seconds rather than minutes. The stopwatch on the bench remained unused, but its presence mattered. The room, unchanged in size, felt smaller due to where people now stood. Nothing physical had occurred. No action had been taken. The rehearsal space, intended for preparation, had become something else defined not by what was being practiced, but by what could no longer be ignored. The sentence did not invite discussion. It had been delivered with control, without sarcasm or raised tone, and then allowed to settle. The man who spoke did not repeat himself. He did not step forward. He remained where he was, slightly off-center, weight evenly distributed, eyes fixed ahead. The question itself was narrow. It did not challenge character or reputation. It questioned applicability, whether what was being rehearsed, distance control, interception, economy of motion, would function when variables could not be managed. The wording implied a separation between theory and reality without stating it directly. For several seconds, nothing followed. The pause stretched beyond what would normally signal a reply. At 3:17 and 30 seconds, one of the men near the wall lowered his arms. Another glanced briefly toward the door, then returned his attention to the center. The exit remained unobstructed, but awareness of it had changed. Bruce Lee did not answer. He did not turn toward the speaker. His gaze remained level. His breathing was steady and visible only by slight movement at the shoulders. The absence of response altered the balance of the room more than any words could have. At 30:18 p.m., the man who had spoken shifted his stance. He stepped forward approximately 18 inches. The movement was small but deliberate. The distance between him and Bruce Lee was reduced to just over 4 feet. No permission had been requested. No one objected. This step introduced a new condition. The rehearsal was no longer neutral. The question was no longer abstract. It existed now within physical proximity. Two of the remaining men adjusted again. One moved closer to the wall, placing his back fully against it. Another rotated slightly, positioning his body at an angle rather than square to the center. The semicircle became uneven, its shape dictated by caution rather than symmetry. Still, no one spoke. Bruce Lee finally acknowledged the change, not verbally but through alignment. He shifted his left foot back by less than 6 inches, opening his stance without retreating. The adjustment was measured. It did not signal readiness to act, only recognition of space. The doubt once spoken could not be withdrawn. It had altered how everyone stood, how distances were counted, how silence was interpreted. What had begun as a technical observation now carried consequence because it existed in a room with limited space, witnesses, and no clear authority to reset conditions. The moment for explanation passed without being taken. No clarification followed. No challenge was issued in return. By 30:18 and 45 seconds, the room had reached a new equilibrium, tense, contained, and unstable. The original purpose of the rehearsal no longer applied. Whatever followed would be shaped not by intention, but by proximity and restraint. By 30:19 p.m., the room had fully transitioned from rehearsal to containment. No one announced it. The change was evident in posture and spacing alone. The open center of the mats had narrowed to a corridor less than 12 feet wide, defined by where bodies now stood, rather than by the room's original dimensions. The man who had stepped forward remained in place. He did not advance further. His arms hung loose, hands visible, fingers relaxed. The distance between him and Bruce Lee was roughly 4 feet. At that range, movement could no longer be dismissed as hypothetical. One of the men near the wall shifted again, sliding his left foot outward to widen his stance. The sound of rubber against matting was audible. Another adjusted his position near the door, placing his hand briefly on the frame before letting it drop. The exit remained unused, but its presence had become active. No one intervened. There was no senior figure asserting control, no verbal cue to resume work or pause it. Authority existed only in what each person chose not to do. Bruce Lee's attention moved for the first time. He did not look at faces. He tracked positions. How many people stood within 6 feet? How many beyond? 3 were now close enough to matter. 4 remained at the perimeter. The nearest wall sat less than 10 feet behind him. At 30:19 and 20 seconds, the man opposite shifted his weight forward, heel lifting slightly before settling again. The movement suggested readiness without commitment. It reduced the effective distance by inches, but the implication was clear. Bruce Lee responded with a single adjustment. He rotated his torso a few degrees to the right, aligning his shoulders off-center. His feet did not move. The change took less than a second. It opened a narrow angle toward the empty portion of the mat while keeping his position fixed. Silence thickened. Breathing became more noticeable. The overhead lights continued to hum, unchanged, indifferent to what was unfolding below them. One of the observers stepped back half a step, increasing the gap between himself and the center to nearly 8 feet. This retreat did not de-escalate the situation. It clarified roles. There were now participants and witnesses, and the line between them had been drawn without agreement. By 30:19 and 40 seconds, the configuration of the room had stabilized again, but at a higher level of pressure. No one could enter or leave without drawing attention. Any movement would be read as intent. Bruce Lee remained silent. He did not signal readiness or refusal. His hands stayed low, palms neutral. The absence of visible preparation made the tension sharper, not softer. The doubt had moved beyond words. It now existed as a test imposed by space, time, and proximity. Whatever resolution came next would not be negotiated. It would occur because the room no longer allowed anything else. At 3:20 p.m., the distance collapsed. The movement was not announced. It did not begin with a step or a sound. It began with a shift of balance. The man opposite transferred his weight forward, committing his center of mass across the remaining space. The gap closed from 4 feet to 0 in less than a second. Bruce Lee did not retreat. The response occurred immediately and without visible preparation. One foot adjusted less than a hand's width, the torso aligned. The angle that had been opened seconds earlier was used. Contact lasted under 2 seconds. There was no extended exchange, no sequence. One decisive action redirected forward pressure downward and offline. Balance was taken, not struck. The man's upper body moved ahead of his base. His feet failed to follow. At approximately the 3rd second, control was already lost. The fall was not dramatic. It was sudden and complete. The man dropped hard onto the mat, shoulder and back making contact first, legs arriving a fraction of a second later. The sound was flat and unmistakable. No one moved to assist him. By the 6th second, Bruce Lee had already disengaged. He had stepped clear, creating space where none had existed. His posture returned to neutral. His hands were no longer in contact. At the 8th second, the room was still. No one spoke. No one advanced. No one laughed. The man on the floor remained there, breathing visible, eyes open, attempting to reorient. The configuration of the room had changed permanently. What had been doubted was no longer theoretical. The silence that followed was not imposed. It arrived naturally, filling the space left by movement. At 3:20 and 10 seconds, no one had spoken. The overhead lights continued to hum. The stopwatch on the bench remained untouched. The man on the mat did not rise immediately. He turned his head slightly, then brought one knee up, testing stability before committing weight. His breathing was steady but heavier than before. No one offered a hand. Assistance was neither requested nor implied. Bruce Lee stood several feet away, facing neither the man on the floor nor the group. His position suggested disengagement rather than dominance. His hands rested at his sides. There was no visible change in his expression. One of the witnesses took a step backward, increasing the distance between himself and the center to nearly 10 feet. Another shifted his stance to square his shoulders toward the wall. These movements were small, but they signaled an instinctive return to observation rather than participation. At 3:20 and 30 seconds, the man who had fallen sat upright. He did not speak. He did not look toward Bruce Lee. His focus remained downward, assessing balance and breath. The fall had not caused injury, but it had removed certainty. No explanation followed. No technical breakdown was offered. The question that had been raised earlier was not revisited. Its answer existed physically in the room, requiring no reinforcement. By 3:21 p.m., the rehearsal space had reset in function, but not in memory. The mats were unchanged. The exit remained where it had always been. Yet no one returned to the center. The incident ended without formal closure. No authority declared it complete. the absence of commentary became its own conclusion. The incident was not documented. No report was filed. No rehearsal notes reflected what had occurred. By the end of the afternoon, the room returned to its intended use, and the work on Game of Death continued as scheduled. Those who had been present did not discuss the moment immediately afterward. In the days that followed, it was referenced only indirectly, usually in the context of timing or spacing, never as an event in itself. When mentioned, it was framed without detail. No one described the movement. No one counted the seconds aloud. Accounts diverged over time. Some recalled the doubt as casual, others as misplaced confidence. Distances shortened in memory. The number of witnesses shifted depending on who was speaking. What remained consistent was what did not happen. There was no argument, no raised voices, no challenge after the fall. The man involved did not publicly dispute the outcome. He continued working. The absence of denial mattered as much as any confirmation. In private conversations, the incident was treated as settled without being named. Years later, fragments surfaced, always restrained, always incomplete. 8 seconds. A closed room. No warning. Each retelling removed more detail, leaving only structure, a question, a response, silence. The moment did not become legend because it was dramatic. It endured because it resisted elaboration. There was nothing to add without weakening it. What remained was not a story of force, but of consequence, an instance where doubt entered a confined space and left behind a permanent recalibration of certainty.